Hello, welcome to CREDC Grow Clark County Podcast Edition. I'm Marnie Farnes, Relationships and Strategy Manager of CREDC. As many of you know, our Grow Clark County events are usually done in person, but of course, in light of COVID-19 and the Stay Home, Stay Healthy ordinance, we pivoted our event to 4 individual podcasts, which will be released every Thursday throughout the month of June. The episodes are all 30 minutes or less. Perfect, of course, at least I think so, for listening to while you're in the car or going for a walk, or maybe just getting stuff done around the house, however you choose. Grow Clark County events are intended to offer meaningful support to Clark County entrepreneurs. And right now we know this is an especially challenging time for businesses. I'm so excited to share with you lessons from local business owners and specialists in the upcoming weeks. We'll start today with looking at forced innovation with Stan Hanks, and he will share on how COVID forced and is forcing business agility. Also, thank you to our sponsors, IQ Credit Union, Ryanet, and Almade Apparel. With their support, we're able to provide this podcast series at no cost to listeners. Today, you'll hear from Stan Hanks on the topic of forced innovation. Businesses everywhere were thrown overnight into a position of having to strategize. We all saw it, some more than others. But one thing is certain, the need to innovate will continue. Allow me to introduce to you Stan Hanks. Stan is a business-savvy venture investor who's extremely knowledgeable in the legal and economic sides of business. As evidence of this, Stan has played an integral role in 14 startups with 9 exits, including 5 IPOs. On the investment front, he has made 8 investments with 4 exits. And please enjoy our podcast. So thank you, Stan, for joining me today as we shed some light on how businesses can thrive during a time of forced innovation. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Stan, obviously I shared with listeners a snippet of who you are, but would you tell us a little bit about what you do and what your passion is, especially as it pertains to entrepreneurship?
Sure, I'm glad to. So I started my career not really understanding business at all. I'm a scientist and a researcher, and by training, and I thought I had a job and I got paid, and that's just the way it was. And I didn't realize that I was only getting paid because the company was creating things that people were giving them money for, and that absent that, I wouldn't have been being paid. One day, the R&D group that I ran was turned into a profit and loss center, and I discovered that I didn't have a budget anymore, that I had a target, that I had to get people inside the company to agree to fund my operations for me and my staff to have jobs. And it just transformed everything at that point. I realized that making cool stuff was really awesome, but that I had to actually make cool stuff that people would give me money for. And that's my passion. I work with a lot of founders, a lot of innovators, a lot of inventors who have cool stuff, and the struggle that they have is how to get people to give them money for it. And I'd like to believe that I can both help them make their stuff be cooler and get them to help them find a way to get people to give them money for
it. Yeah. Hey, speaking of money, before we get into our topic, let me digress for just a moment. What are you seeing in the venture capital world?
It is unbridled chaos. Venture capital does not quite work the way people think that it does. As if I've got a fund, you see a press release that says I've got a $50 million fund. That doesn't mean I've got $50 million sitting in the bank. I've got commitments from my limited partners to give me $50 million over the life of the fund, but they only give me that in chunks. And if I don't have cash on hand, I may not be able to get my limited partners to meet their capital call obligations, so I might not have money to write checks with. On the other hand, if I've got a pile of cash because I just did a capital call before the wheels fell off the bus, I can make all kinds of investments. And so we've got this huge diversion. There are a lot of deals that have closed in the last 2 or 3 weeks for that matter, some of which are quite large, um, that were in the pipeline. They were making their way down. The capital had been allocated, and it was just a matter of getting the last documents across the line. So there've been some really big investments, but you're best to think about those as having started in kind of the January timeframe, as opposed to something that just like popped up,
Mhm.
day before yesterday. Um, and at the same time, we're seeing term sheets being withdrawn from a lot of the firms that have decided that all of a sudden in the new economic environment, this risk, this investment is a little too risky, or they really want to make it, but they can't close a capital call to be able to write the check. So it's literally all over the place.
Yeah, that's what I've kind of heard as well. And hopefully our topic today, which is forced innovation, will shed a little bit of light for businesses on how to set themselves up well for when things sort of pick back up and come back together. So, all right, let's get into our topic, which is forced innovation. Tell us, Stan, what you mean by forced innovation and how are businesses experiencing it?
Well, so the when you start a business, you've got a business plan, and you've got projections, and you've got a thing that you're going to sell, and you think you know who you're going to sell it to, and you start marching off into the future. And the first encounter with the customer, it all goes sideways because it isn't the way you thought it was, and that's normal. So you make these little incremental stepwise changes and improvements to your business process, and you change your pricing or your term of service, or you add this or take away that, and that's normal for a normal course of business. What isn't normal is where you discover that what the thing that you're doing is not at all the thing you should be doing. For example, today is the 15th anniversary of YouTube having launched.
Hmm.
YouTube is completely ubiquitous, right? I mean, you can't imagine a
Mhm.
world without it. Well, 15 years and a day ago, it wasn't there. Um,
Yeah.
and it did not start off as a mechanism for sharing videos. It was a dating service. It's online dating.
Wow.
And somewhere in the origins of that, they decided that adding videos so that people
Mhm.
could introduce themselves would be a cool idea. And somehow that became the tail that wagged the dog. And
Mhm.
eventually, I mean, there's no dating on YouTube, so it's gone, right? And the same thing is largely true of a lot of other companies. Like,
Mhm.
Facebook started as a way for Zuckerberg and his friends to meet hot chicks in the other Ivies,
Mhm.
and now it's this behemoth that owns the world. So that kind of thing is called a pivot, and that's relatively common in venture funded um, companies. And it's
Mhm.
almost always opportunistic because you've just discovered that the thing that your customers are valuing is different from what you thought, and it's an intentional change.
Mhm.
This is completely different. We've got these outside forcing functions that are requiring you to look at things completely differently. One of
Yeah.
the founders, one
Oh,
of the
go ahead.
founders that I mentor has a startup that's focused on basically getting people into winery tasting rooms, and they've got a whole bunch of technique around accumulating information about different offerings that each of the tasting rooms have, and technique for routing people through multiple of them over the course of some period of time, and it's great stuff, other than the fact that all the tasting rooms closed about 3 months ago.
Mhm.
So what do you do at that point? Well, you can kind of sit around and twiddle your thumbs and hope that eventually everything reopens, and that if it happens, people will want to go. Or you can realize that if I apply myself slightly differently, I get a different outcome. So instead of routing people to tasting rooms, maybe I route people to places that they can pick up hand sanitizer and gloves and masks. Um, it's the same idea. It's just it's a completely different use of technology.
Right.
So that's an example, and then we've got other examples of companies that are involved in businesses that have just largely been decimated. Travel and entertainment's completely different. And if you're thinking about how to deliver like events, then that's another great thing.
Mhm.
If I've got an event that I was going to have that's going to bring 10,000 people into a venue, I can't do that, right? I can't bring 10 people into a venue, so I've completely got to change how I deliver, what I do, and maybe do I even do this? And once I've made that change, do I ever go back to live events? I don't know. So that's the
Yeah.
sort of thing that we're seeing in terms of the forced innovation. And it's happening in real time. I was going to say, on top of that, I've got my internal operations because now I don't have an office, right? Everybody's working from home, and I've got to completely rethink the way my company works.
Mhm.
I've got to innovate that too. And I didn't plan on that. So lucky
Right.
me.
Hey, I was just thinking the YouTube example and then the app that directs people to wineries, like the consistent thing that I'm picking up from that is just the
I think
narrow
I lost you.
scope and of what they were and how they quickly realized, oh, we're going to need to broaden our market if we're going to make it. I was recently told by a trusted CREDC partner how critical it is that businesses look into the future as best they can right now and adjust their business plans. Last year's ideas and plans and budgets are likely to be out the window because things have shifted and will likely to continue. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that's completely accurate. One of my friends is the chief investment officer for a large financial management practice, and he said that looking at data from January and February is like looking at data from the Roman Empire. That it's just that stuff has changed so much that you have to forget everything that you thought you knew and start over again. And it's hard. We call it looking around corners, right? I can see what's going on straight ahead, but I can't see the thing coming around the corner, and I've got to figure out a way to adapt myself to that. And it's hard. It's not natural for a lot of people.
No, it's scary. It can be really scary, especially for certain people. So yeah, what do you tell somebody who knows that they need to do this, that they need to perhaps take a risk or a gamble or force themselves to make a decision based on something they're unsure about, and they're feeling that stress and sheer agony. For some people, it feels like sheer agony. Like, do I go right or do I go left? What do
Yeah.
I do here? What do you tell them?
Well, the first thing I tell everybody is that it's the only constant in life is change, and that if you wanted something stable, you signed up for the wrong gig. That's not this. And then I remind people to breathe, because this is truly an exceptional time. It's the end of May, and 100,000 people in the United States have died. That's like as if Beaverton were evaporated off the face of the earth. Renton, major
Right.
cities that we know, right? Imagine that whole thing is just gone. That's what we've experienced. So the sense of loss and grief and uncertainty is completely founded. Give
Mhm.
yourself that space. Don't You don't have to do everything right now, and you don't have to do it all at once. And being kind to yourself as you make that transition is super important. The other thing is to seek wise counsel, because you're in a position as a business owner where you have made long-term commitments and obligations based on things that are no longer true. And as a lot of people are reluctant to consider this, but this is a completely appropriate use of the bankruptcy law, because conditions have changed. You may be economically viable, completely viable, at a different level if you can be relieved of some of the obligations that you made when things were different.
Mhm.
Um, Seek counsel. Don't do this unilaterally. Talk to your tax people. Talk to a lawyer. But consider that as it's not failure. It's the law of the land being structured to protect you from changes like this, right? So um, that's and the other thing is to be prepared to embrace a very different future. We don't know what the future of work is, but it's reasonably certain that it's not what it previously was. For decades,
Mhm.
large businesses, or businesses large and small, have said you have to be in the office because you can't work otherwise. And in the last couple of months, we've discovered, well, proves not to be the case. And
Right.
so as you think about reinventing your internal policies and the tools that you use and the way that you manage people and get work done and what the nature of the work is, your future is going to look different. And it should increase opportunity. If I've got 3,000 square feet in downtown Vancouver, and I'm trying to hire people that are willing to show up and put in 8 hours in that space, my universe is significantly different than if I can hire that really brilliant guy in Des Moines that I can't even get to visit Washington. Right? So embrace the positivity in it, as well as trying to figure out how to manage the pieces that are causing you the most personal frustration. And know that you're not alone. There are support groups out there for people that are struggling with the change, and avail yourself of that as well.
Mm-hmm. So true. It's interesting this time. I don't know about you, but this time has made me really realize how connected to people I truly am. Yeah.
I thought that I was a big old introvert. And most of my life, it's like I live in the code cave. I kind of come out and get pizza and coffee, and then running companies, it's heads down. And yeah, I'm on airplanes and I'm going to meetings and stuff like that. But the vast majority of my time wasn't face to face with other people. And as this thing set in, I discovered that no, actually, I'm spending between 1 and 3 hours a day talking face to face with other human beings, and when that goes away, I wasn't really prepared for that.
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting time, that's for sure. I feel like you kind of already touched on this, but thinking about businesses developing or cultivating rather agility to outlast the pandemic. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so a lot of people. So this gets really interesting, right? Because to win, you have to have focus. You have to have focus and commitment, and know what you're doing, and run after it. And otherwise, you risk what we call shiny object syndrome, because you're walking along and all of a sudden, there's this thing over here, and then you go after that a little bit, and there's this thing over here, and nothing ever happens at that point because you lose focus. It's one of the things we grade founders on, is your ability to maintain focus. But when you
maintaining focus while being open to pivoting.
Yes, and that's the art, right? Because now you're in an environment where everything is different, and so you have to pay attention to things that work. And the number one indicator, I think, my advice would be, don't take on long-term commitments, because that will hamper you from being able to move fluidly. And the second thing is, look at the long-term value that you bring to your customers, and figure out how to make more of that happen. And most of that's probably going to involve closer interaction with your customers, because the thing that they value about what you're doing for them may not be the thing that you think that they value. Paying attention to the YouTube story, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that I personally believe that while agility is important, that resilience is much more important. The ability to take a punch and keep going is the thing that ultimately denominates. Fall down 9 times, get up 10.
Mm-hmm.
is the thing that really determines your success outcome. Because if you can do that, then you've sort of baked in the ability for some of that agility, if you just don't give up. And that's hard too, because it's a very internal resource intensive to be able to get up when you've had something go sideways.
I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking that earlier when you were mentioning just some of the points you were making. I thought it just reminds me of the whole lean in concept, and leaning into the stress or leaning into the uncomfortableness.
Yeah, and just expecting that. So you don't have a constitutional right to be stress-free, right? And you as a business and you as a business owner have voluntarily elected yourself into a position of all the stress, because now it's all on you. And it's not just you, but it's your people. And I know that as a leader myself, I feel responsible for my people. I feel responsible for their well-being. I feel responsible for providing for them and making sure that I'm giving them opportunities to earn a good income and to have advancement and learn things. And when stuff goes sideways, that's just gut wrenching. Plus, I'm now worrying about my family, where I've got the same kind of feelings as well, and it's hard, and you just have to accept that the reality of the world is that in any given moment you don't know what's coming in the next, and that expectations that things should be a certain way will make you miserable when they're not. And
So true.
being able to hold a viewpoint that says I have an anticipation that I would like things to be a certain way, and I'm prepared for them not to be, gets you a lot further.
So what are 3 takeaways that businesses can do right now, even if they're small?
Well, first one is breathe. That is number one, top of the list, because if
Mm-hmm.
you if you can't slow down and be grateful for things as they are, your
Mm-hmm.
ability to take the next step is dramatically improved. Um, and as part of that is, you also be kind to yourself. You don't have to do this alone, and you don't have to do it all right now. The second piece is to get honest, right? Figure out what you've actually got and what you can do with what you've got.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really hard for a lot of people, because you want to live in the up and to the right curve in your projections, and in the forecast in your spreadsheet, and the real world going on in a completely different direction around you is not what you want, right? But this is the time where you have to get really honest and figure out what your opportunities are. You've got something. You've made it this far. There's a
Mm-hmm.
plaque that a friend of mine's got in his office that says, "I didn't come this far to come this far." Right?
I like
Right?
it.
So
Mm-hmm.
you've done something significant to get here, right? So celebrate that, figure out what that is, and how you can, turn that into income going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is embrace the change, because the world is going to be different, and if you can get ahead of the curve in terms of, particularly for your own internal processes, figuring out how to run your company in a distributed world where people are not necessarily in the office, and how to create an economic benefit from not having that big real estate footprint,
Mm-hmm.
and figure out how to use that to create more rather than less touch with your customers and get better engagement, um, you'll come out in much better shape than if you are completely convinced that it has to go back to where it was. So embrace the change. And um, the economic environment, whatever your business is, um, with very few exceptions, there's a place for everything that existed before in the future going forward. It just doesn't look the way it did retrospectively. So you need to figure out what that is and how to embrace it,
Mm-hmm.
and then lean in.
Yeah, so true. It seems like the word pivot is the 2020 word of the year.
Yeah, I kind of think so. We've seen a lot of pivots in the last. I mean, one of the things that I look for a lot is willingness to pivot, and this is the year where everybody's pretty much going to have to pivot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. It's so interesting because, you think about most professionals, business owners, CEOs know the concept of looking ahead, being ahead, just in good times, like the importance of being ahead of the curve, so that you don't end up like Blockbuster or yeah. And but right now we're in this time where it's like, as the kind of the topic for this call is forced innovation. It's totally different when you're forced to do that versus when you have the luxury of kind of contemplating. Right now businesses are being forced to think of the possibilities for their business.
Right. It's like the difference between a military unit marching in a parade and a military unit taking fire on the battlefield. Um, we're on the battlefield. We're all taking fire. And we've been told that we need to get to the other side of this river, and no one's sure if we should build a bridge or if we should try to swim. And or if there's something that's going to eat us in the water. I mean, we just don't know, right? It's
so true.
And it's not relenting. And that's one of the other things I want to weigh in on. I'm an optimist. I believe that there's a brighter future on the other side of all this. But what I don't know is where that edge is, and that there are people that genuinely believe that it's just a matter of days before everything goes back to normal. I'm not one of those. I think that for starters, it will never go back to the way it was in January of 2020, and that the world is fundamentally changed. The second thing is, I don't know how long this pandemic is going to be pressing on us. I don't think anyone does. And as soon as anybody tells me that they've got a view on that, I automatically distrust it, because we don't know enough. There's not enough science that's been done that give us the information. 6 months from now, I'll probably believe that there's enough information to make an informed decision, but today, not so much. So I tell people to plan for things to continue to be fluid.
Yeah.
And that you're setting yourself up for a colossal loss and failure and pain if you believe genuinely that it's just a matter of time before everything goes back the way it was. This is a time to really get serious about figuring out how to be fluid.
Well, if anybody can give us that advice, I think it's you, Stan.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for all the points that you shared today, and I know those who listen will really appreciate it as well. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm a giant fan of the CREDC. I've been cooperating with you guys for probably about 4 years now on different things, and you add a tremendous amount of value to the region, and I'm happy to participate in anything that helps you with your mission.
Oh, thanks, Stan. That means a lot. And that concludes Podcast 1 with Stan Hanks. Next week, join us as we have Carmen Nazario with us to discuss strategic entrepreneurship. Until then, have a great week.